Cool. Welcome back, everybody, to the Easy Spotlight podcast. Today, I am joined by Mr. Michael Oliver. Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great on this solar eclipse. How are you
On this
doing?
so- on this solar eclipse, we're flashing back, and we were just talking about the first time we met, which was about 5 years ago in Pai, Thailand. And the thing I remember of you, to be honest, not that you had fallen off your bike and that you were looking like a mummy as I described you with your knees and thing of bandages as the typical tourist. It was more so your energy, if I'm being completely honest, because I don't know how long you'd been in Pi, but it seemed like you'd been there forever because everyone was kind of gravitating around you, and you had this really just energy that everybody wanted to be around. Do you remember that time? What were you doing when you were in Thailand back then? What kind of stage in life were you?
Yeah, it was an interesting stage. I mean, I think it was the second solo backpacking trip that I had done, so I was traveling by myself, and that's always exciting. I'd done Europe a few years before that. And so I think I was trying to find what my next step would be. And luckily, I actually found it in Pi with you. And I don't know if you remember this gentleman named Isaac, but I think he was also hanging out with us as well, down at one of the hostels there. And he actually was someone that inspired me to create the Flying Sage, in lots of ways, because he had his own kind of drop shipping business, and that's how one of my businesses started, was actually through drop shipping. And so, yeah, like back then, I remember I was just looking for the next thing, and I ended up coming across that through a bunch of different interactions I had. And yeah, I can't remember too much else about maybe my headspace at the time, but I think I was trying to just figure out what I wanted to do, because I was thinking about maybe going down the meditation path and like guided meditations and things like that. Then I also was really passionate about psychedelics. And so I think I was just on the cusp of like starting my entrepreneurial journey then.
That's cool. It's funny that that kind of point was maybe a transitional period for you, but that's kind of where I want to start, or maybe a bit earlier than that, to be honest. And
Okay.
exploring into the world of psychedelics, I myself, I'm going to be honest, I'm a novice in this world. I don't know, so it would be great to kind of understand from you, but more so your building journey as I'm doing the research and you in the company after another company and community and how it all seems to grow. So that's kind of an overview of the things we're going to go to. But I want to just come back to you growing up in Vancouver, Canada. I'm assuming, and you first being maybe introduced to the psychedelic world, and or where that started and why you went and then on to study cognitive studies in
Mhm.
British Columbia.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Vancouver, but I actually did spend a lot of my younger years in England. So I spent 8 years from when I was like one until I was nine in England, in Birmingham. And then I flew back to Vancouver, and then my family came back to the house that my mom had here. And so most of the years I can remember were here in Vancouver. And yeah, I was in high school when a friend that came to our high school, he kind of introduced our entire school to cannabis. And so I got introduced to cannabis. I started smoking it, and I thought that it was pretty cool in the sense that it seemed just more healthy to me than alcohol. Like I was also at the same time getting introduced to alcohol, like maybe a few years before that in high school, probably like 4 or 5 years before that or something. And I just remember this being like an alternative that felt healthier and just like more rewarding. Like it actually, I feel like I actually gained stuff from it. And so I don't know if I would have called it a medicine at the time, but I think I would have called it an ally of sorts, or like a spiritual tool. And I was noticing that I was definitely gathering things from that experience. And so for me, your question is about, getting into psychedelics. Cannabis was actually, I'd say, a gateway, if you want to call it that. It was a gateway to me wanting to explore other substances. And that same friend that introduced cannabis to our entire school decided to, and he invited me to try mushrooms with him. And so he was my first guide, or trip sitter, you could call it. And so my first psychedelic experience, if you don't count cannabis, which I actually do count cannabis as a psychedelic, although it's kind of up for debate. Uh, my first actual psychedelic experience with what you call a classic psychedelic, like mushrooms or LSD, was my mushroom trip, which I actually did at my parents' house and with my friend. And yeah, overall, it was really eye opening. I actually have a picture somewhere that I drew of all the things that kind of came up in that experience. But overall, it was like a positive experience, really profound in lots of ways. And it just like opened up my eyes to be like, okay, there's something really interesting at the least about these experiences, right? Which basically sparked this curiosity of like, okay, noticing. I think what really happened was there was like simultaneously this recognizing that psychedelics, or this experience that I had, was extremely rewarding in lots of ways, but then simultaneously it was like taboo, like it was like illegal. And I'm like, this is so weird. Like, why is this thing that I found like actually really like beneficial for me, not just in the sense of like escapism, like it's not like I just like I felt a bunch of pleasure and just like got high and like, you know, would just like sunk into like just positive feelings. It wasn't necessarily like that. Like there was lots of feelings that came up, all sorts of things. And at the end of the day, I felt it was rewarding. And so I was like, why is this illegal when like alcohol is legal? Those are the sort of questions that I started asking. And that was basically the start of my path with psychedelics. And that started to lead me down the path to wanting to like research it more and study it more. And that's that kind of like keeping following that path. That's where I get into my university kind of career, which I can share more about if you want.
Yeah, I want to know, when you're going into university, do you know at that time before? I also don't know exactly how the Canadian system works, if it works more like the UK system or the American system, in that the UK, before you go to university, you have to decide what you're going to do. Whereas in the US, you kind of take all the electives and then you eventually, in your junior year, can say, hey, I'm going to go and major in this. Did you know at the start of your university kind of career, this is the path I'm going to take, or was it some finding out along the way?
Definitely some finding out along the way. So when I graduated high school, which I was just reminded of today was 10 years ago. So in 2014, I graduated high school. I actually took a whole year off to go travel Europe. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, that was my first solo trip. And or actually, sorry, I should correct myself. So right after high school, 10 years ago, I went to my first year of university, which I got into the university I wanted to, which was UBC here in Vancouver. And I started studying kinesiology, which is like physiotherapy for anyone that doesn't know, like the study of the body, helping people like rehab injuries and whatnot. And so I did my first year with kinesiology, and it wasn't the best. Like the reason why I wanted to go into become a physio was honestly like back when I rewind myself to like 2014 Michael, was probably just like money. Like I'm like, oh, this seems like a thing that we can make money, and like I like sports, so like this seems good. And I probably had like my parents be like, yeah, that's good. Um, so there's like a few things going on there. But after a year of studying, I I passed most of my classes. I think there was one class that I didn't pass, but overall I didn't do very well. Like I struggled, which was surprising to me, because in high school I went to like a fairly challenging like private high school, and honestly like the workload there was actually more challenging. But I think I just found myself in this position where I actually didn't really know what I was wanting. So even though I was studying kinesiology, I was constantly questioning myself, and at the same time I was also going through a bit of like a spiritual awakening, I'd call it, kind of, which was aided by psychedelics, but also meditation and a lot of books I was reading and stuff. And so I did really bad in school in my first year of university, and I didn't really make any friends. So I was like, hey, you know what? This is not working out. I'm going to stop. So I stopped. I took a year off, and that's when I went to Europe for like 4 or 5 months. I backpacked Europe by myself. And it was after coming back from that trip, traveling, that I was like, okay, now I know what I want to do. And I found out that there was this program at UBC. So what I decided is I really wanted to focus on artificial intelligence. I was like, that's what I want to do. And I found out this program at university, which I didn't even know about before graduating high school, called cognitive systems, which is a mix of psychology, philosophy, linguistics, and computer science. And you take all four of those classes and you kind of mix them together with like the theme kind of tying it all together is AI. And so this was like, I guess 5 or 6, 7 years ago now. And that's what I was going to do. I was like, okay, I'm going to become like a programmer, or at least I'm going to like go into psychology because that seems more interesting to me. Psychedelics helped me realize like how interesting my psychology was. And so, yeah, that's what I decided to do when I came back. And I just instantly knew that was way better decision, because like I would just like really engage with the content. Like everything I was studying was super interesting. So I was like, okay, that helps a lot. And then I also started making friends. And then part of it was also like I got embedded in some like music clubs. Another big part of it was also that I actually moved out to campus. In my first year, I was living with my parents, so I had to transit like every day for 3 hours, which is not good. But then for my second program, I went and actually stayed at university. So yeah, there's a few things there. And yeah, cognitive systems definitely was the better choice for me.
So there's a part of, you're always kind of constantly curious. That's kind of finding your lane, and each individual person is going to have their path. And it was about you finding your path down AI. What about 5 months in Europe makes you say, I want to do AI?
Yeah,
Because I'm not putting that together.
it's a good question. I mean, let's see, if, I'm trying to remember back then. So I was journaling a lot on my travels, and like I've always been interested in sci-fi. So just putting that out there, like some of my favorite movies were like The Matrix, Terminator. I wouldn't say Terminator was a favorite, but it was something that I watched quite a bit. What else? Like 2001: Space Odyssey, which is like all about AI. That was like probably one of my favorite movies of all time, and I watched that when I was younger as well. So like I don't know, I had this like I guess pop culture understanding of what AI was, and it seemed really interesting. And I just remember I remember being in Europe and I was actually journaling about neural networks. Like I just found them interesting. I don't know. I'm trying to remember what exactly got me started on AI. Like maybe it was something in my high school experience, or maybe it was someone that I met. But I think I just recognized it as like an up and coming field. My uncle was telling me I should get into robotics, and I think I just like started focusing on that. Like, okay, this is really interesting because it also like what really interested me was consciousness, and that's what I started like getting really interested in. And I think there was just a point where I started to recognize the interesting intersection between like psychology and computers, and how a lot of people were trying to emulate human minds in artificial systems. And to me, that just seemed really interesting, like how we could use the human brain as inspiration for, yeah, cognitive artificial systems. And so I just like started going down a rabbit hole on that. And I'm like, okay, like programmers also seem to make a lot of money. So, I'm not saying that it's not like I went to Europe and I'm like, I don't want to make money anymore. Like money's still important to me and I still hope to make money. But I was like, what's some way that I can kind of put it all together? So anyways, that's kind of what was going on in my head at the time. But I found out fairly quickly, maybe like 2 years into my program, that coding was not really what I was destined for. I passed all my classes, but it just wasn't really my thing. So that's when the psychedelics started to show themselves more.
So then advancing to you graduating UBC, and if I understand this right, you got a job at MAPS Canada, which is the leading, I'm going to say, governing body, the leading body of advancing psychedelics within Canada, and trying to help that effort around the world. And as I've read, as you've described, that as a dream job for you.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that stepping in? Because now we're saying, okay, I'm assuming it's maybe not the most money-filled career at this point, but it's something that you're really passionate about. What did you expect out of that experience, and what was the reality?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll just back up one step there. Like I was at university and I was running a psychedelic society there for about 4 years, and I was just doing that as a volunteer. And it was always something that was kind of on the side. But I'll say that that actually really helped me get the job at MAPS, because it was through that volunteering and being the president of that club for 4 years that introduced me to someone at MAPS. And then I started volunteering with them first. So I was actually still in university when I started volunteering with MAPS Canada. And I was still in university when I got the job as well. So I got the job with MAPS as a part-time job, as the only staff member, along with the executive director. So very small organization. It was just me and my boss. And I got the job as a half-time job while I was still finishing my studies. So I still had a year left of work. So I managed that half-time job along with my full-time studies. And then when I graduated university, then the job became full-time pretty much right away. And then I just kind of expanded into it. And I mean, I didn't really know too much of what to expect when I took the job, but it definitely was probably one of the. I mean, it was a huge pivoting point for me, because, like I said, it was my dream job. I mean, like you accurately said, like MAPS was and still is largely like the psychedelic organization. Like they've been around the longest. They've been around since 1986. MAPS Canada was only started in 2011, but they're still just like the leading psychedelic community in Vancouver for sure, if not Canada at the time. So for me to be able to work with them was just like, it felt like a dream. And honestly, I got to learn so much in that role, because even though I was technically volunteer coordinator, I basically did everything, like social media. I coordinated volunteers in Vancouver and then Toronto, built like ran their tech committee, did like drug policy, every single like sector of the nonprofit. Like I helped out with fundraising, social media, um, and a few other things. So I just learned a lot in the role, and they gave me a lot of, because I was only the only staff member, I had a lot of leeway to kind of build it, and kind of how I got to like leave my imprint on it in a sense and like help it grow. And I did see it grow a lot. Like when I joined, just before I joined, they were just, it was like a small group meeting in the basement of like a church. And then when I joined it kind of upgraded to this other space, but then it just kept growing until, yeah, we started running stuff in Toronto as well, and kind of all over the map. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Let me know.
No, yeah. I think one thing I noticed from you and your story and other people who kind of land their dream first job, let's say, because things evolve, passions and directions change, is that you're very good at utilizing the resources around you and realizing the space you're within. So I've got to assume when you're in UBC and you're leading this voluntary
Mm-hmm.
community, you're starting to realize, hey, I've got access to all these young people who are interested in it. This is a position for me to kind of take a lead where I might not be, and that then propels you forward to get into maps and so on, and then kind of replicate that experience. You're saying you were the one part of a small team. I'm sure that experience of wearing so many different hats is just invaluable as you kind of continue to go on. Was that experience at university the first time you had kind of led a community, or where does the community piece part? We're going to kind of jump around because I know it's going to come back
Yeah.
around later, but I want to know, where does that first community piece start for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to be honest, the first time it showed up was actually through Xbox. If I had to be honest. So I played a lot of video games when I was younger. Xbox was my thing. I didn't play online games, but I played a lot of Xbox and Xbox Live on like the original Xbox and the 360. And my favorite game was Halo. I played tons of Halo, and I wasn't in a professional league. Like I didn't get to, there's like a major league gaming, but like I'd say that I was like close to maybe getting there. Like I spent a lot of time on Halo and got pretty good at it. And in that process, I actually created a clan, which was like the word for like an online gaming community, basically. At the time, I didn't know, like, I didn't think of it as a community. I didn't think of myself as a community builder. But like, if I'm reflecting, like, okay, when did it actually start? Like, it probably was with that, because I asked all my friends to join this club. It was called the Armed Clan. And I asked that everyone had to change their gamer tag to armed something. So they would get to choose like armed whatever. I was like armed politic for a while, and then some of my other friends were like armed Joker man, armed diplomat, and like it grew to about like 20 or 30 people. Some people from my high school, there was like 5 or 6 of us, but then people from all over the world joined this clan. I don't even know, like, I forget now, like what the, aside from the name thing, there was no other rules. It was just like a fun group of people that we hung out with, and we would play with each other. And there were some people that were more competitive than others, and we would play a couple other clans as well. We would like coordinate like matches on Halo, especially. So, anyways, I could keep going on about that, but that's basically where it started. I think the community piece, and then throughout high school in person, um, like I'm just trying to remember. Like I was always a pretty like social person. I always like to bring people together. Like in university, I won an award of being like the prefect of spirit, I think it was, which kind of at the time I might have felt a little bit like wishy-washy around it, like my feelings towards it. But I think it was they were wanting to reward me for something that I was doing in the school, which was, I think, bringing people together. Like I always noticed that my school is pretty small. Like my high school had 30 people in my grade, and we had 400 people from kindergarten to grade 12, and so it was pretty small. But even within that, like I think I was able to like make an impact from a community perspective in certain ways, whether that be with some sports or other things. So yeah, I think that was kind of the main, yeah, where it mainly started was online, actually, through video games.
I love that. I love when you kind of take a second to look back, which probably we don't always do, but realize, this started way before. I'm now seeing the journey,
Yeah,
all these pieces put together, but this actually started at Xbox when I
yeah,
was 10 years old, etc., which is cool. And then, so we're jumping forward now back to,
yeah.
say, 2019, I think, and you start the Flying Sage. Initially, you can correct me if it's 2019, but initially a clothing brand
Yep.
company, and the goal of that was to democratize transcendence, right? And
Yep.
so, why do that? You're already in your dream job. You're already getting to wear so many hats. You're getting so many experience. Why should you, Michael, then go and say, "Hey, I want to go and do, something else. I want to branch out," because this is the bit I really want to kind of get behind. Why should somebody who's in a position, who's technically continue to push themselves and continue to find more?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Let's see where to start with that. So yeah, I was working with maps. It had been like a couple of years now. I was making good money, like enough money to like comfortably live in my place. I think I was making about 60. Well, first it started lower, but when I quit, I was actually making about 60K a year, which was good for Vancouver. I was able to pay what I needed. And let's see, I think the main thing was like I was just feeling. Well, your question is about Flying Sage, like when does that start? So I guess I have to share that first because I the Flying Sage had been running for a little while before I left the job. I didn't leave Maps and then start Flying Sage. So I was working with Maps, and it was actually after I met you, after went to Pi, and I told you I met this guy there named Isaac, who you may or may not have met as well, and he just inspired me to get into dropshipping, like I'd said. So when I got home, I'm like, okay, like I want to. This guy was just inspirational for me. Like he was traveling the world. He'd been traveling for months and months and months. He had an awesome girlfriend who was wonderful. He was making tons of money like per day on his phone, and he wasn't really doing much. Like he was just traveling and passively making money. This was the first person that I'd met who was like actually doing that. Like I'd heard of it before, but he was actually living it. And I was like, hey, I want to live this guy's life, or I want to have some of that energy, And so when I came back, I'm like, okay, well, I want to start drop shipping too. So I was like, what could I do? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm passionate about psychedelics and I want to do something new. And what I'm seeing is with the psychedelic clothing industry, it's all just like tie dye in your face. And I'm like, I think there's room in the market for something more sophisticated and modern with more simple designs, something that you'd feel comfortable wearing to work, for example. And that maybe you'd kind of like draw like a cheeky eye from someone who's like kind of knows that you're into psychedelics, but you don't want to like broadcast it to everyone that you're like a tie-dye hippie or something. So that's kind of was my thinking. I'm like, hey, I'm going to create a clothing brand that's going to cater to those people. And so that's where the Flying Sage was born. And we started as a clothing brand for about a year and a half. And that's when my sister, she joined the project with me after I kind of came up with the idea and I started the store. I made my first few designs and got things rolling. And then it was after I decided, okay, this is actually something I want to put time into. My sister joined. And so that was while I was in university, while I had my job with Maps. It was just something on the side. And the reason why I did that, to answer your question, was because I just wanted to have the freedom and not have, I guess, a boss. I wanted to have something of my own. I wanted to also like just create something. I think I had this innate desire to like want to create something of my own. So I think that was a big part of it. There was obviously a part of it around money. Like as awesome as the Maps Canada jobs was, I also constantly felt in that job like well, first of all, there's clearly only so much you can grow in that type of job. And ultimately, like it's a nonprofit, right? If that wasn't clear, if you guys had never heard of Maps before, it's a nonprofit organization. And, you know, that doesn't mean that I was volunteering because I was getting paid. But at the same time, like you don't really hear about people making tons and tons of money in the nonprofit sector, right? It's more of an active service. And some people might, there's probably some, counter points to that. Like there's probably some people that do make a lot of money in it. But anyways, I was like, this isn't where I want to make all my money. Like I want to have a business as well. And also like my grandpa was an entrepreneur. My parents were entrepreneurs. So I think there's a bit of it in my blood too. So that's why I also wanted to do it. And so, yeah, that's when I started the Flying Sage. And the intention was just to have something on the side. But it wasn't until 2 years into the Flying Sage that it changed to a community. And then after that is when I left Maps.
So how does that happen? You kind of beautifully segued into getting there. How does he get to the point? Because this is a lot of people where people get stuck. They're
Yeah.
like, I'm doing it, but where's the point where I can jump off and take that risk and bet on myself? So
Yes.
what makes that? What allows you to jump in your brain? What gives you that
Yeah.
confidence?
Totally. And so I totally agree with you. This is a hard part, I'm sure, for lots of entrepreneurs, and I see it with friends of mine as well. And I have to say, like, it was definitely very challenging for me because in my case, obviously, like I said, I had this job which in many ways I considered a dream job. I was making good money. I was working from home. I was working with cool people in an industry that I liked. So like, why not just keep riding that? You know, like it'd gotten to the point where I was getting pretty comfortable. There was the potential to maybe even get promoted to a different type of role that would be more operational, which could have been cool. But to be honest with you, like I had this thing that was starting to grow, and I also saw an opportunity. And the opportunity I saw was that specifically in Vancouver, like MAPS was, like I said, the leading psychedelic community, but it was focused on research. So if you look into MAPS, you'll find out that they're a research focused um, organization. And so, you know, I'm interested in research, and I've had enough research studies of my own throughout the years of schooling that I've had to like be able to engage with that sort of stuff. But what was more exciting to me was the concept of like more of a social community. Like I wanted to see how psychedelics can impact people on the social fabric. And so essentially I saw this opportunity in Vancouver that I just wasn't seeing the type of events that I'd want to see around psychedelics. And it wasn't really stuff that I could do with MAPS. And also I was also running into a thing where MAPS was in some areas of MAPS organization, like I was being told that MAPS wasn't really all about community building. Like even though I wanted to like go down that path, like I ran into a bit of resistance because that wasn't the focus. The focus was research. And so there's some subtle differences that play out there. And basically I'm like, okay, well, if I can't do that like here, I need to do it somewhere else. And so once we pivoted to a community from a clothing brand, doors started to open. And I think that's, to answer your question, that's one sign. I think if you're working on something, you should, you know, it's obviously going to be on the side to start. You should work on it as much as you can, but keep tweaking things until you feel like things are starting to move. You know, it's definitely riskier to jump from something stable to something that's not stable at all, right? That's a bigger risk. So the way I played it out was I waited until Flying Sage was at least like was moving, right? Like I realized that community events were better, and I needed to kind of validate the idea, basically. That's a good way to put it. You want to validate your idea and make sure that it's not only something that you think is cool, but you need to validate it and make sure it's actually something that the market wants, right? Because it's one thing for you to have this cool idea of something that you want to make, but if the market's not there for it, then it's you might as well just forget about it because no one's going to buy it. No one's going to support you. And if it's something that you need to support you, then people do need to buy it. You can't just be ignorant to that, right? It needs to make in a bit of money at first. So that's kind of what I did. I guess I validated the idea. I made sure that it was profitable. People were interested in it. There was a demand. People did want these things. And once I started seeing that, I guess I started building a bit of infrastructure. And keep in mind, this is all like after my daytime job, right? This is after I work 9 to 5 with MAPS roughly. And then this would be after that work. I would work more. So it was a lot of work at the start to combine both of these things, toggle both of them. But then at a certain point, it just came to a point where I was like, okay, like this is it. Actually, for me, I started to realize that my attention was just like starting to get consumed with Flying Sage. Like I started to just think a lot about it to the point where I actually just felt like I was doing a disservice to MAPS. To the point where I felt like, okay, MAPS really needs someone that's 100% in this job. And when I started, that was me. And I came in like so stoked and I like built so many things. But now I was realizing, okay, I'm kind of getting over this now. It's been like 3 years. And this is actually really what I want to do. And so for me, it just came down, there was like an ethical piece of like someone in this job should be absolutely stoked about it. And that would be the best thing for this organization. And so for me, that was a big turning point. Was like the best thing for MAPS is actually not me right now because I've now have this thing that I want to actually put my time into. So there was that piece that came online that was really important. And then in terms of being able to actually make it work, like there's never going to be the perfect time. You just have to jump. And that's what I did. I guess I forget when exactly it was. I think it was August of a couple of years ago. There had been a big project that ended. I felt like there was a good time. I gave lots of notice. And yeah, I just kind of planned my switch. And it did help me that I also had another business. So like it wasn't just the Flying Sage that then supported me and caught me. I also had another practice that I started around the same time, which was me guiding people on psychedelic journeys, which is another business called Legacy Journeys. And to be honest with you, that business actually I purposely built it in a way that it was geared towards people that could pay more money for certain experiences. And I mean, in general, like guided psychedelic experiences are more expensive than what I'm trying to do with the Flying Sage. But in particular, I made the brand like a little bit more of a luxury brand, you could say, in the psychedelic space. I don't like using that word because it's kind of weird in this context, but it is true. Like there's just a certain demographic that can afford that sort of experience. And so that actually helped me, um, helped catch me.
What were you? What was the feeling at the time? So when you're starting to go Flying Sage and you're starting these community events, and say one is starting to get traction, like what
Mm-hmm.
are you hearing, and what is that making you feel that's then propelling you forward? Would you say it was external stuff that was coming back to you, or how long was that internal motivation keeping up? Because I think people underestimate how long sometimes the internal motivation needs to be sustained till you could get to the point of, oh, this is amazing, this is great. You know, you've
Yeah.
always been this.
Well, I think it's definitely a mixture of both. And I can say for sure that even now, like however many years in from the inception of Flying Sage, I guess it's been like 4 years now, or a little bit more since starting the clothing brand, but about 2.5 to 3 years with the membership. Even now, I still need to like really gather that internal motivation because it's, the entrepreneur journey is up and down, up and down, up and down. So if you're gonna step into that journey, you have to recognize that you're gonna need to drive that internal motivation all the time. Like that's, I guess, until it gets to a certain point. Like I'm not necessarily at that point yet, and who knows what that point is. But like I wouldn't say I'm quite there yet. Like I'm not just like chilling with like, I'm not just like have this business that's just like making money or anything like that, right? I'm still very much like working in it and on it at the same time. But I've definitely improved a lot. And so to answer your question specifically about kind of back then, what was the feeling that was coming up? There was lots of great the good thing about the community business is like it's all about the people, right? So when it comes to with certain product businesses, I feel like they would maybe have to go out of their way to like talk to their customers who might normally be kind of removed from them, right? Like if you have an online, like let's just use the Flying Sage example as a drop shipping business. Like back when we were just selling clothes online, we'd have to really go out of our way to like get feedback from people, and I would never rarely see those people, right? Like maybe I'd get like a testimonial from them, but I wouldn't see them. But when you're building community, it's totally different, and it's kind of awesome because you are seeing all the people that are your customers, right? If it's assuming that you count people as coming to your events, if they're paying for their events, you can think about it as customers, but they're also your community members. And there's this interesting blend that starts to happen where your customers are your community members, and not every business has that, right? Some businesses don't even have a community element. They just have a product that they ship, and every customer is just a number, right? But with a community, you can't do that. Otherwise, your community is going to fail. If you see every customer as a number, that's not going to work out. So every customer is a human being, and you have to get to know them and you understand what they want. And so, in my case, like they started letting me know like how impactful these events were. I started to get feelings of just lots of excitement, and I can remember back to certain periods of that journey where like, yeah, just like the world's your oyster. And I think this is the case with a lot of businesses. When you start out, you'll probably find that there's this really joyous, maybe like a joyous period where it's like, wow, like everything's possible. I can do this. I can do that. I can do this. And, um, everyone's usually rooting for you because people generally like to support young entrepreneurs. Like it's, especially if you're young, it's easier to get a little bit of buy-in from people because everyone just like wants to support you for the most part. Even in a industry like mine where you're dealing with illegal things, I can tell you that people are out there that want to support you. You just got to find them. And so, yeah, I was feeling a lot of those things. And then eventually I think that kind of wanes off. And then you start to realize like, oh shit, I can't do everything. I need to focus on a few of these opportunities. And that really has become the tricky thing, is like recognizing there's opportunities everywhere, but you have to just, the strategic thing is to try and focus on which ones are best aligned for you. But that gets into another topic now. So hopefully that answers your question.
Before moving to legacy journeys, because I want to get there. I just want to. You're at the point now with Flying Sage where you're doing 5, 6 events a week, right?
Yeah.
And so, just what can someone expect from a Flying Sage event? Where it used to be a t-shirt company, it transitioned to a community. What are people going to the Flying Sage for today?
Yeah, I love that question. So it the interesting thing about our community is that it will definitely vary from event to event because we've purposely tried to add a variety of different events. So for example, the main categories we have are cold exposure, breath work, sound baths, ecstatic dance, or just like movement. So those are kind of, for in-person events, those are kind of the main buckets, the main categories. But there's also some other ones that we throw in there every other week. There's also cannabis ceremonies that we work with as well. But I'd say, kind of the common thread that brings them all together is like transformation, I want to say. So people can come to Flying Stage for transformation, and they come for transformation in a variety of ways. I think the big one is like a space to be vulnerable. So a lot of our events, in some way, there's a container that's being created that can allow you to really be vulnerable and expose yourself to other people in ways that typical events don't really facilitate that. So like I think about the typical like networking event, like it's not really intimate typically, and it's not really like created in a way that's really allowing people to um, get down the layers, right? Like a lot of time when we're at a networking event, we're kind of up here in like opportunities in business, like what can I get from you? What can you get from me? Like how can we exchange and work together? And that's great. There's a place for that, but none of our events are about that. They're all about like dropping down to like the bottom layers with people, like what makes you human, what's really on your mind these days, like what are you struggling with, like all of these sort of things, like quite frequently after an event of ours, like we'll have some sort of ceremony, right? So with breathwork, we typically combine breathwork with microdoses. So Flying Sage doesn't work with any high dose psychedelic. So I should say that right off the bat. If you're listening and you're hearing Flying Sage psychedelic community, you won't have to expect a high dose experience. You're not going to be tripping at any of our events. We purposely keep all of our doses extremely low. So we only work with microdoses. But combining that with certain types of breath work can actually be very powerful. So even though we don't have large doses of psychedelics, the events still end up being pretty psychedelic. Some people out there might not know this, but you can get psychedelic states just using your breath if you breathe a certain way. So that's what we focus on. We focus on equipping people with the tools that they need, somatic tools and like internal awareness to understand how to like navigate their own consciousness in group and in community. And this is really cool because in of itself, like it reveals a lot of things and people can have a lot of transformation in our event. So people might, for example, come to our event and they connect with their grandfather who they haven't seen in years, who died, right? Like something like that might happen. Or someone will realize something about themselves, like they've never done this thing they've never loved themselves, and they've never, and it's because of this and this with their mom or whatever. There's like ancestral and family lines that come in to a lot of our stuff. So you can expect kind of going deep, to put it simply, and you can expect doing that in a community setting where other people are also happy to share that experience. So you're not in it alone. You're actually like reflecting and hearing from other people's experiences. And you can also expect some fun events too, like some dance events, New Year's events where people are engaging in psychedelics in a therapeutic and a safe way, and doing that together as well. So yeah, I hope that answers your question there about the different types of events that we have.
Absolutely. The thing I'm hearing the most is you're creating a safe space for something that can be so vulnerable for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, and something that I think for many around the world they'd have to experience on their own. They're probably experiencing in an environment that's not the most ideal. You're creating that. You're creating almost new possibilities for how to
Yeah.
even look at the whole space in general. And I think that vulnerability and that safe space is then highlighted if we move on to legacy journeys and your work
Yes.
as a guided practitioner. And so to just
Mm-hmm.
quickly summarize what that is you taking people in guided psychedelic experiences with psilocybin, MDMA, 5-MeO, DMT, all these different things. I'm reading it, but that that space where you're then going in, into these guided spaces, even more vulnerable, I can imagine. Right, that this is what I've got to assume. So, what do you feel your responsibility is when you're there guiding someone in this? What responsibility do you take on as a practitioner?
That's another great question. It's a huge responsibility because psychedelics are, you can think about them almost as like mental surgery in some ways. Um, I don't know if that's the best analogy, but that's one that comes up. Or The simpler one is just looking at the word itself, psychedelic. It means mind manifesting, which means it allows your mind to be kind of revealed. And so this definitely happens for people who are taking psychedelics, but if the process is happening effectively, like this also translates to these your mind being revealed in some ways in the external world. And so if you're with someone, you're basically, and you're taking psychedelics, you're essentially exposing your mind to them, right? You're exposing the deep layers of your subconscious and your unconscious to come out. And sometimes you can mitigate this. Like not everyone does that. If you take a low dose of psychedelics with your friend and go to a festival, for example, that in that setting, you might not necessarily do that. You might be able to just focus on the external and dance and have fun, and it's not going to be a therapeutic experience, or is not as much of a therapeutic experience. But if someone's coming to a journey with Legacy Journeys or a similar organization, or working with a practitioner, then yeah, they have to be very careful that they trust the person that they're working with, because there needs to be a lot of trust there, because you're, like I said, exposing your mind to someone. Just in the same way that you would want to have trust with someone doing surgery, like a physical surgery, you're exposing your body to them. I don't really see too much of a difference. Like I think you need to be very comfortable exposing your inner workings to this person. So, when someone works with me, like they have to fill out like a 40-minute long intake form that in of itself is like quite intense. Like it asks a lot of questions about a lot of different things, like family background, community, like how connected you are to your friends, your sleep cycle, diet, nutrition, like all these different aspects of someone's life is kind of revealed to me before I even work with them. So before someone even works with me, they're sharing this information with me. And so there's lots of responsibility there. Generally, a lot of the psychedelics that I work with are very safe. Like, and that, again, that's not necessarily always understood because there's lots of stigma around psychedelics, but there's a lot of safety with these substances physically. Personally, like I have a background in lifeguarding. So during my university career and even after, like I worked as a lifeguard for many years. So I feel a bit comfortable having like a strong first aid background so that I can, if something happened that required first aid, like I would be able to support. But to date, I've had over 100 clients and there's never really been a single issue like that that's required, standard first aid and whatnot. The other piece to comment on there with responsibility is like ethics. Like there's lots of ways that you can do this wrong, and I think it's important to really have accountability. So when you ask about responsibility, like I think that I need to know that I'm working in an ethical way, and the only way to really know that is to have other people hold you accountable, right? Because if you work in a silo by yourself, like you can make a mistake and no one will know, especially if you're working with someone and they're on psychedelics, right? Like if something were to happen and you were by yourself, you could always, like someone who's maybe what's the right word, like malicious in their intent, or predatory, or whatever you want to call it. If someone's a bad actor in the space and they're working with someone, they can always, if someone else is under the influence of a substance, you can always manipulate that person, right? Like the power dynamic is completely imbalanced. So there's a big responsibility to, as a practitioner, to like be responsible with the use of that power in a situation. And so coming back to the accountability piece, like I always work, like pretty much in all circumstances, work with another co-guide. Like that's a really good best practice that I have. And then also working with Flying Sage is really nice too, because it really complements it, right? Like I'm far from being siloed. With the community stuff, like I'm talking to and working with so many different practitioners and facilitators. So I would like to be more involved. If I was doing more work with Legacy Journeys right now, which I'm not doing that much. If I was doing more, I would like to have a more like specific accountability group for me and other facilitators. But with the amount of work that I'm doing at the moment and the fact that I do work with my partner and other people, I find like the Flying Sage itself is actually a really nice safety net and accountability piece for me. But I'm always looking for ways to improve that.
One thing I was really interested in learning that I didn't know about is your process to it and how long that process actually is. So just to rephrase it for people listening, you've got 1 to 2 weeks of intention before you even get anything. You then have your journey, which is 1 day, and then you have that 1 to 2 weeks again after that of integration, and then you finish off in that community piece that you just said there with the Flying Sage, so that you're not kind of left in this silo. And that is something that never even really knowing this world. I've heard of the experiences and whatnot, but to know how extensive it was, really, really interesting to me. And so for you, within that whole journey, you kind of laid in there the responsibilities and the piece that goes onto it. But I want to know, what are the type of people, would you say there is a stereotype, or are people coming from each different way of life? And do they know, like, that this is what they're getting into? What do they first come and expect when they're saying, hey, you're a guided practitioner, or uh, can I work with you? Do they have an understanding that this process is that long?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think people come with a lot of different expectations and understandings, and those have to be carefully mitigated through the preparation process. And that's one of the main reasons why we have the intake form, is to help understand what this person's understanding is already of psychedelics and how the medicine works. Because yeah, people come with all sorts of notions around psychedelics, right? Some people come in with a very some people come in that are very experienced, like they've had multiple psychedelic experiences before. They know what a safe container looks like for them, and they ask really good specific questions. They will like ask me about how I approach certain things, and so I know that if they're asking those questions, then that's really good because they've been in a situation like that before, right? And ultimately they're looking for someone safe to journey with because they know that that will be effective for them. There's other people that come that have never done a psychedelic before, but they've heard like, oh, it could be good for this or that, right? There's people commonly that come that are dealing with mental health conditions. So I do work with a decent amount of people that fall into that category. So that's people with like depression or anxiety. I had someone reach out the other day who was interested in working with me, um, and she was presenting issues of like OCD, and so she was looking to work with psychedelics and that. I've had people with eating disorders work with me. And then I do draw the line sometimes because there's certain types of trauma and certain types of mental health conditions that I won't work with or won't feel comfortable working with. But there's that whole bucket, and then there's the whole bucket of people that are just looking for a spiritual experience. So there's people that, let's say, are like the guy in his 50s who's been working as a lawyer for his whole life, has got lots of money, um, good connections, but like not really feeling fulfilled in his life anymore. Like kind of like, what's the purpose of this? He might come to me because he wants to have something that will just shake up his reality a bit and maybe show him what's next and how he can kind of adopt a kind of change, make small changes in his life or big changes. So those are kind of the two main camps. It's like mental health conditions or spirituality and personal development. And those two kind of come, yeah, in like equal amounts, I'd say. And people come with all sorts of specific intentions too, like, oh, I want to connect more to my lineage on my mother's side. I want to figure out how I can be like love myself more. That's a really common one, like how to be more loving to oneself, how to mitigate certain self-destructive patterns and behaviors. Those are other things too.
I think it's really interesting, the scope of what you can bring to it, and also what you can get out of it, and how so much of it is, of course, internal, but the space in which you've created and you kind of allow through being a practitioner, through the community, I'm assuming allows you way better results, allows you to really dive deep. So I'm going to move on to your latest venture, Community
Okay.
Compass. And, you know, from what I'm seeing online, from what I'm seeing, this is new to you, but new to you only in the business, because everything you've mentioned along the way in today's conversation, your parents being entrepreneurial, you always being interested in community, you're always kind of having a mindset towards, the profitability, for lack of a better word, but, the money aspect in community. I think that's what a lot of people will struggle with, and kind of trying to understand, like, okay, I enjoy this community, but how can I make this maybe my business? How can I make this grow? And that there's, just because you're making money off a community doesn't make it any different, and so
Mm-hmm.
you're specifically are going in to help build sustainable and working on wellness communities. So what has given you to start your third business in the Community Compass, and start, helping other people create their own community?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's something that I've been doing a little bit here and there on the side. I've always been kind of reluctant to the word coach, but I mean, I've played the role of coach in different ways, like in sports in high school, but also in like just entrepreneurial discussions. I feel like when I'm with my friends, I'm always loving to like brainstorm on ways to like optimize businesses and try and support people as best as I can, given what I've done. Right. So part of it has just been like this is just an extension of like what I'm seeing happening. Like people are starting to ask me for support, and I'm also starting to notice just in Vancouver alone, there's lots of wellness communities that are just starting out in their own kind of niche. And I feel like what I've done already could be of support for them. So I could see like there's a avenue of collaboration there. I suppose I think another part of it is like more practically speaking, like I had an idea for a product that I've been wanting to release for a long time. And I'm like, oh, this would be so cool to release. And I'm like, oh, it doesn't really make sense to do it under Flying Sage or Legacy Journey. So I'll just do it under my personal brand. And so for a while there, I just changed my personal Instagram brand to be part of that. But then after more thoughts, I'm like, okay, it makes sense to actually make this a separate thing, to have its own kind of website and own kind of audience. And so that product is like basically a Notion workspace. So Notion is like a tool that I use to organize my life. And I've created like this operating system over the last 4 years with the Flying Sage to manage like all of my sponsors, affiliates, people, companies, and events too. And it's all kind of in this one interconnected thing. And I'm like, the cool thing about Notion is it lets you templatize these sort of things. So I can basically sell and share this template that I've made with people. And I'm like, seems like a really cool business idea. Then I saw this other guy who who I follow, who's also doing something like that. And I'm like, okay, like, I think this is the time to like, it seemed like an opportunity for me to like work on it. So I'm like, okay, let's do it. And another part of it trailing onto that is like right now where the Flying Sage is at, I'm feeling like I don't want to just resort to I don't want to resort to having to take income from the Flying Sage, because right now a lot of the revenue from Flying Sage is going to other places. And like, I'm not necessarily taking a salary yet or at the moment. And so I'm like, okay, what's something else I can maybe do that's not Legacy Journeys where I could make some like more consistent income? And I'm really excited because I'm also trying to optimize Community Compass as a very simple business. Like Flying Sage is quite complicated. I just listed some of those things that I manage, right? And like they all have their own manuals and complex procedures associated with managing each of those aspects of the business. And for a long time, I was doing that all by myself. And so it's gone to the point now where like there's all these things that happen and there's so many like inputs to the Flying Sage. Like someone can come in and have a request from here, and then someone can come in and want to collaborate from here. And like managing all that complexity is fun, but also, and like it's exciting, but it's also like a lot. And so Community Compass is like my attempt now to also trying to just make a business that's very simple, like one product, one funnel, and just like make it very easy. So yeah, those are the different tangents that have brought me to Community Compass.
A lot of different tangents. Yeah, I think a
Yeah, there's a
natural
lot.
a natural entrepreneurial spirit, and just to focus on community because it's in the name, and you've seen it across. You're now touching on different areas. We're working with different wellness people. What do you think is one thing that community builders get wrong, or when they're trying to go? What do they start to spend too much time in the wrong place?
Spending too much time in the wrong place. Well, I think maybe there's two initial things that come to mind. So the first is like a community platform. I was talking to someone the other day about this who's like trying to start a community. And I think a lot of times you wonder like, where should I house my community? With the Flying Stage, we host on Mighty Networks as an example, but there's lots of these platforms now where you can host your community, and a lot of them charge a decent amount for you to be able to host on there. And I think my suspicion is that quite a few community builders at the early days, they focus and they worry too much about like, what is their community platform going to be? Like, how are they going to structure it? When they should just focus on like the tools that they already have and the tools that people are already on. So people are already on WhatsApp, they're already on Instagram, they're already on Slack. Like if you're going to start a community, definitely don't go build a new platform somewhere else. Like go to where people are first and build your following there. And that could be a lot of places, right? Some people build communities on Twitter or on Facebook or Discord, but like those platforms are better to start on. And don't worry about having like your private community platform yet, because it takes quite a bit of time to manage that. And it's also better to move to something like that when you have a critical mass of people. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is something that I actually wrote about in the Community Compass newsletter not too long ago, which was just like, I think something that people get wrong is just around this money piece. And you kind of were alluding to it when you when you ask the question or introduce community compass. But like, if you're a community builder, I think, and you're expecting to just create an endeavor that's fully grassroots, and you're not asking for money at all, like, it's possible and it's happened, and I've seen it with some communities. But I've also seen so many examples of communities that do that and that wither away and die because they think that they can sustain the business, or they don't associate their community with a business. It's like, oh, I'm just going to make a community. Like, it's not a business. It's like, okay, but like, you want to do that full time, so how are you going to support yourself? It's like, if you do want to do it full time and spend all your energy on it, like, it's actually selfish of you to not ask for money, because you're not thinking about the health of the community. If you want to be able to service the community best and actually provide value to your members, you need to fill your cup up first. And if you can't fill your cup up from the community, then how are you going to be able to deliver on your promises to your members or your community? So yeah, I think that's another important thing too, is just like to get your head around like the fact that if you're trying to make a community brand or just a community in 2024, I think it is important that you have at least some business knowledge, right? You don't have to aim to make a lot of money. That doesn't have to be part of it, but you do need to have a plan for making it sustainable.
I've learned so much in this conversation, and I think in your separate ventures alone, we could do a podcast apiece, and honestly, just focusing on those and what's to go. But I think this has been a great just summary of where your mind is even coming from, the entrepreneurial spirit, the power to kind of use your resource, the keeping money. It, I think the money part, I think, is something that I'm going to take away from this specifically, and how you framed it, and how you kind of just speaking at the end there, and that if you want your community to really thrive and you really want it to help people, it needs to get to a point where it's sustainable. And without
Mm-hmm.
money, and if it's just one person and they're just trying to pour their energy into it, it's almost not possible. It's going to die eventually, as you said, on the vine. But we're reaching about an hour, and so I'm going to call it time here. But we're going to have to do it again, maybe dive into a different topic in a different area. For everyone listening, I'm going to link all the different websites, pages, your community comes, fire stage, legacy journeys. There's so many different things. But Michael, I really appreciate you coming on today. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. And yeah, I look forward to the next round for sure.
Appreciate you. Everyone, keep it easy.